have a time set aside on the agenda tonight for a public hearing regarding the intention of the Board of Education to sell school fire prevention and life safety bonds. If there is anyone here tonight who would like to address us on that issue, if you could just hang on until we get to the public hearing, and that would be the most appropriate time to do that. But if there is anyone else here tonight who is not on our agenda who would like to address the Board of Education about anything else, if you could raise your hand, please. Okay, since there is no one, that will take us to our public hearing concerning the intent to sell school fire prevention and life safety bonds. Before we open the public hearing, I'd like to give the Board of Education the opportunity, if anyone had any additional questions or concerns that still linger from all of our prior meetings where we have had this type of material, as part of our meeting. This would be a good chance to address the superintendent if there's anything else that we would like to hear from the superintendent on this issue.
Is now the only time where we could ask questions?
No.
Okay.
Okay. If the board has nothing else, then we'll entertain a motion to open the public hearing. The suggested motion is that the public hearing on the proposal to sell $16 million of school fire prevention and safety bonds for the purpose of conforming its existing facilities that house students to the building code promulgated by the Illinois State Board of Education is now open. All those in favor? Aye. All right, so the public hearing is now open. So now, if there is anyone here who would like to speak to this issue, please come forward to the podium. And if you could, let us know your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, my name is Vicki Wilson. I live at 104 Wilson Court in Palatine, and I've been a resident of Palatine for 16 years. I'm here tonight regarding the potential bond issue. In 2005, when the referendum passed and a tax increase was put through, District 211 officials said the new money would prevent cuts to programs and staff. Well, it did that and much, much more. In an environment where local townships have been in the highest foreclosure brackets and unemployment continues to plague many families, District 211 continues to spend and spend. To quote just a few headlines in recent memory, June 2011, District 211 approves raises for transportation and food service employees. August 2011, District 211 budget balance includes raises for administrators. While District 211 has been spending, it seems they may have forgotten the responsibility to the community. Board members should be responsible stewards of the public trust. However, it seems little of their decision-making and planning considers the public, most of whom are struggling to find jobs, keep their jobs, pay their mortgages, and maintain their homes. In light of this, it's critical that financial resources be managed very carefully. That means using only what you need and not wasting any. Fund balances are excessively high here in District 211. The fund balance to revenue ratio far exceeds the state recommendation of 25 to 30%. District 211's is about 68%. As a comparison, District 15's is about 35%. There's about $80 million in excess cash that is not being used and is forecast to grow over the next several years. Given these balances, there is enough money to complete the life safety projects without borrowing. Why not use the cash that's been stashed away from the 2005 referendum to pay for these projects? According to your tentative budget for this year, you are also projecting a $12.9 million surplus. With such high fund balances and a projected surplus, why the need to borrow? Shouldn't borrowing be a last resort, restricted to a time of true need? This looks like it may be a case of want versus need. This additional money isn't needed, but it's wanted because it's easy money. Issuing this loan would not increase the tax extension, and borrowing rates are low. However, should we be borrowing more money and paying more unnecessary interest, not to mention the transaction cost of issuing these bonds when there's not sufficient need? Please consider the financial health of the community as a whole. You are on this board to represent the entire community. Those of us in the community who dutifully pay our portion for the local schools need to know our money is not being wasted or hoarded. We cannot imagine a surplus or the high bank balances that our high school district has. Having all this extra money sitting around making 0.2% interest does not make good sense, at least not to me. Perhaps having some of that money put back into our hands so we can pay our mortgages at 4 to 5% interest and/or stimulate the local economy. As the community's representatives, I urge you to look at the whole picture and thoughtfully consider where the money does the most good. Mr. Lefevre, I do appreciate the time you took to respond to my email today. I did not find that my questions regarding the high fund balances were answered to my satisfaction, though. The abatement of the debt service levy over the past several years has occurred, but that doesn't address the excess cash balance that I'm questioning. In spite of the abatements, the fund balance has been growing. In closing, I ask you to determine what is going to happen with all the excess cash you are holding, and why not use that money instead of issuing bonds? Why pay more interest than you will be getting on this money? Please don't go for the easy money because it seems like nobody cares. People do care. Make the right choice. Don't borrow.
Is there anyone else? Please come forward. Also, if you could let us know your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Joe Peter. I live at 1256 East Cooper in Palatine. I've been a resident for 29 years here in Palatine. I also I'll digress a little bit. I've also worked in District 15 as a volunteer teaching American history for the last 12 years. So I'm reasonably familiar with what goes on in schools. I just want to add just a little bit to what Vicki Wilson said. Looking at your tentative budget, what concerns me, if in fact you were to comply with the 25% guideline Illinois has for keeping fund balances, that would put the school district at about $100 million in excess of what they need. If you increase it to 50%, that leaves $39 million in our pocket. It doesn't make sense to me to go out and borrow. And then as I looked at the tentative budget, I noticed you're only going to spend, it looks like about $3.4 million, maybe $3.3 million because you had $100,000 in contingency funds in there. And you're going to put about $12.2 million in the bank. Sit there. What kind of sense does that make? Well, you got somewhere possibly between $40 and $100 million sitting in the bank. I just don't understand the need to go out and borrow another $16 million. I think, as Ms. Wilson said, make the right decision. Do not borrow this money. Live within your means. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
My name is Nick Fatouras. I'm a Schaumburg resident. I had copied the first 2 pages of your report, but I proceeded to leave it at home, so I'll try to remember some of the information. Most of my concerns were addressed by the previous 2 speakers. I noticed that there is a reserve of around $100 million. What's an appropriate reserve? How many years do you need? Anyone? No. Okay. The second point, I took a look at the figures and I noticed that in the 2011-12 budget and actual, the expenses were overstated, the income was understated. If you take the difference of those 2 amounts, it would be in the neighborhood of $10 million, and there wouldn't be a need for an additional $16 million loan. Now, that loan is placed on the taxpayers. And we cannot keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing We have a spending problem at the local level, state level, the federal level. If you want to see the results of what happens when you borrow and borrow and borrow, take a look at Europe, where countries are close to default. We cannot keep going in that direction. We have to put a limit, and we have to reorganize things. We have to prioritize. We have to introduce incentives to save. You cannot keep coming back to the taxpayers and say more and more and more. That's not the answer. I looked at my tax bill just before I came here, and the percentage of school taxes, all school taxes, in my area is 71% of the bill. 211 amounts to 29+% of my tax bill. We don't want continuous increases. We want to see some efficiencies and thus some reductions in the taxes that we provide to support our school districts. I don't see this borrowing $16 million. The phrase that was used was 16, we will borrow $26 million for the next several years. What does that mean, several years? How many years? Does anybody know?
Excuse me, Bob, maybe, or Mr. Lefebvre, maybe you can explain to the gentleman that we don't have a dialogue at this point.
We'll get to that after the public hearing is done.
Okay,
There'll be a
then
presentation that covers
let
it.
me raise the question, and at some point you can answer me. How many years? And why is it front-loaded? $16 million the first year. And the other point is that the money that is kept in the reserve has never been utilized effectively by any public organization. Now, yours may be the exception. I don't know, but that's the general rule. Therefore, throwing $16 million when the reserves are in the neighborhood of $100 million, that money is not needed right now. It's not going to do the good that you intended for. It's going to stay in the bank, and somebody else is going to benefit. Those are the comments that I had to make. I would appreciate if I get some feedback. Thank you.
Actually, if you would like our superintendent to contact you, she'd be happy to do that. If you could leave your name and telephone number with Mr. Torres right down here on the end. Thank you. Is there someone else? Please come forward.
Good evening, my name is Len Green. Pardon me, sorry. I'm a Palatine resident of some 20 years. So, I do have a comment or a couple of questions on the same issue regarding the proposed sale of bonds for 16 million. In short, a lot of what's been said before I wholeheartedly endorse. I believe the board owes us a lot more information. I have read some of the information that's out on the website and other publications. And I must say that it strikes me as a series of platitudes about the real issue. What I find it lacks is any analysis of some of the options that might have been considered. And in particular, I'd be interested to know whether the bond counsel who advised the board and the district's senior finance guy, whether they considered options other than the sale of $16 million worth of bonds. For example, if we took 16 million out of that pretty large cash pile that's out there, I think the interest cost or the loss of interest on that money is about 0.2%. I'll say again, 0.2%. Speaking to Treasury colleagues of mine, the cost of bonds, issuing bonds today, including their marketing, etc., conservatively is about 3 to 4%. So we're looking at something like a proposal that would cost the district and therefore the taxpayers conservatively somewhere between 15 and 20 times as much as if we just took the cash out of what's a fairly large cash pile. So I would like some understanding of the rationale behind that, because I don't think it's been properly explained. And I think until that's been done, I would recommend and urge that the board put this whole issue on ice. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Please come forward.
Bryan, Neal, I'm a District 211 resident. I confess I have not paid attention, like most, if not the vast majority of the community, to the actions of the board. But it is even more important when you're not under a microscope that the board act with financial stewardship, because, like individuals, character counts the most probably when nobody's watching. So when I read that there was a more than $250 million budget passed without any discussion from the board, that sort of struck me as unusual. It could vary between everything is so great, numbers are so well understood, and everything had been taken care of ahead of time that there was no need for any discussion. Or it could be that nobody's paying attention and nobody wants to get into the numbers. I'm going to assume the best. But borrowing money at this time is tough. Nobody has to be told, I hope, about the financial straits of our municipalities, nor the state of Illinois, which probably is in arrears greater than any other state in America, worse than California, especially with pensions. You do not know what the state legislature may do with you to cover pensions. You may have to produce money that you can't imagine in the future, depending upon what the state of Illinois does. And that's not even talking about what the United States is doing. The impending fiscal cliff, okay, is traumatic if nothing happens, and nobody knows what's going to happen. It would be nice if somebody who's making some reasonable money, like the school board, could try to save something. If we could try to cut back on something. If we could not borrow in this time, it's an example for everybody else. So if there are at least 2 people on my street, my wife and I, who don't want to borrow money. We would rather see something cut. Okay? We have a tremendous school system that can do with less. If we can't do with less, I think we're going to be in trouble, because everything points to the economy slowing down. You may get the same amount of money from our property, okay, but your expenses are going to go up. And if you borrow more money and pay, we are ultimately going to have bigger, worse cuts in the future, or you're going to have to ask us for money in the future if we borrow. I would rather see you work into the budget, or at least discuss it since none occurred, about how you could cut some money to pay for what needs to be paid for in the future currently. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Bill Power. I've been a resident of Palatine for 14 years. I have 2 kids all the way in college now through the system and 1 in high school right now. I just see just such a waste of money over the years where you have people in leadership positions, and whether it be in sports teams or whatever it might be, where they have a budget, and if they don't meet that budget, if they save some money each year, they're looking for ways to spend that money. So the next year that they don't get their budget cut. And it's gone on years and years and years. And Mr. Lefevre, since you've taken over at 211, the share of my property taxes that go to 211 is more than doubled in 6 years. And I think that's a travesty. You know, this is a bridge community. I think the teachers in this community are very good, but they're also paid very well. I think they're in the top 3% in the nation for pay. And there's so many things that I see waste. For years I've seen my kids go through school, they've all played sports, and it's been great, but I've seen waste upon waste, and we keep raising our taxes just to keep up with more waste and expanding budgets, and something's got to be done. Somebody's got to take a leadership role, and I'm hoping it's you, Mr. Lefevre. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, if there are no additional comments, the board will entertain a motion to adjourn the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All right. That will bring us to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda. We have a suggested motion that the consent agenda be approved as presented. Can someone please move that?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion here? Roll call, please.
Mr. Brandt? Mrs. Burke? Aye. Mr. Gerber?
Aye.
Mrs. Klunkowitz? Aye. Mr. Robertson?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mr. Lefevre?
Aye. That will bring us to special reports. First, we have our Freedom of Information Act requests. Are there any questions or comments here? That will bring us to our operating fund balance report for the period ending June 30, 2012. Any questions or comments here? That will bring us to our 2012 school report cards. We have a suggested motion that the Board of Education directs the superintendent to make appropriate availability of the state-produced 2012 school report cards. Can someone please move that?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion here? All those in favor? Aye. All right, that will bring us to our District 211 Professional Development Opportunities Report. Are there any questions or comments? Dr. Rod, would you like to make any remarks?
Yes, I would like to make one comment, and I would like to thank Terry Bush. We have currently we have 5 cohorts that we have running, and that's really thankful to Terry and the work that she's done, so we're really pleased with that. And the other thing about our staff development, this is something I think that board you asked to have an update on this on an annual basis. One of the things that you're going to see is in this past summer, we have significantly increased the number of our teachers who took in-house classes this summer. So it went from 200 to 617. So again, I'd like to thank our staff for having those in-district courses. I think they've been very valuable. Many of them have been with technology, and I think that's been very helpful.
I do have a question, if I may. I'm a believer in continuing education. You always learn something, and I'm truly a believer in that, and I think we do a lot to support our staff. What I'm wondering about is, could and maybe we've been given this, and I just don't remember what the amounts are, but for the graduate coursework, do we have an estimate how much this is, how much we've paid out for our staff for the graduate coursework, maybe over the couple of years that we're referencing here in the materials? If you can give us that information, maybe in the near future would be good.
Certainly, I can get that information for you.
Because I know all the other things are already blended in with the salaries and the in-district and everything, but I think the graduate coursework, that's definitely totally separate. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Bring that back for the next board meeting then. Any other questions here? Okay, that will bring us to new business. First item here is board member expenses. We have suggested motion that the Board of Education approve the pre-approval form for future expense reimbursement as submitted. Can someone please move that?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Gerber,
Aye.
Mr. Robertson,
Aye.
Mr. Brandt, Mrs. Klunkowitz,
Aye.
Mr. Young,
Aye.
Mrs. Burke. Aye. Mr. LaFever.
Aye. Next item of business is the renewal of the lease for off-campus program. The suggested motion is that the Board of Education renew the lease agreement for the off-campus Academy South program at its current location at a rate of $3,850 per month from July 15, 2013 to July 14, 2016. Can someone please move that?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Robertson,
Aye.
Mrs. Klunkowitz,
Aye.
Mr. Gerber,
Aye.
Mr. Young,
Aye.
Mr. Brandt,
Aye.
Mrs. Burke. Aye. Mr. LaFever.
Aye. Next item of business is report on our tax levy. And I believe this will be accompanied by a presentation.
Yes.
Dr. Rob, if you would like to appropriate introduction.
Yes, very pleased that Dave Torres will be presenting his information about the tax levy. There were some questions that were asked earlier this evening, and I believe that Dave will be able to answer many of those questions that were asked. I mean, one of the things that Dave will be able to highlight is the $24 million that we have had in the debt service abatement. I think he'll also be telling you about the $2 million that we have taken from reserves for our life safety projects, as well as some of the other savings that we have.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. As we begin tonight's meeting and review of our proposed 2012 tax levy, I thought it would be helpful for us to review the two-year property tax cycle. During the first year, the property is actually assessed, and it reflects the property values as of the 2012 tax years. And then during the second year, the actual tax bills for the prior assessment year are calculated and payments collected from the property owners, and that is, in other words, for the 2012 assessment is actually referred to as the 2012 tax, and that is actually paid then in 2013. And what I've highlighted on this particular slide is actually the tax cycle. And the first step that's identified there at the top is the assessment process. And here's where actually the assessment of the values of properties is actually determined on a parcel by parcel basis. And that's done during the first half of 2012. The review process itself involves actually where the appeals would come into play on the assessments, and that starts actually towards the later end of this, and actually will go into the first part of February or March even of 2013. The levy itself is, for all taxing districts, is where we determine the amount of the property taxes based on our specific need going into the next school year. The levy is finalized in December, and it's actually then submitted to the Cook County Clerk. And the actual amount of the levy will not actually be determined until actually next year. The equalization factor, known as the multiplier, and here is where both the assessor and the county board review equalize the assessments on an initial basis, and then actually later on, based on actual sales ratios throughout the state will apply an equalizer or multiplier throughout Cook County. And then that will actually determine then the next step, which is the actual EAV, or the equalized assessed value. Remember that a levy itself divided by the property values of the school district, or the EAV, is what actually what determines the tax rate itself. And then finally, the collection and distribution, here the taxpayers is where we pay the bills, and those come in actually, again, in 2 installments. This, for the first time historically, that, and I can't even tell you how long,